finish labeling this. Does anybody remember, this is the canal that's in the spinal cord, that's filled with cerebral spinal fluid? Does anybody remember the name of that? That's your central canal. See that? Okay. I think that's it for the big parts. Okay. Now, we start putting in some tracks. Okay, talk about the gray horns being the neuronal cell bodies. If the gray horns are the neuronal cell bodies and all the rest of this is white matter, it's grouped into different tracks. I'm going to choose to start down here. See that? Let's say that all the somatosensory tracks that we're going to talk about are going to be down here. Let's go ahead and start with somatosensory tracks. Another important thing is there are just basic parts, big parts of the spinal cord, if you want to think about it that way. So there's going to be this part here, all this white matter in this region. So you see that? That's going to be your dorsal column. So it's very generic. It's your dorsal column. So in general, all the white matter that's located in the dorsal part of the spinal cord, they're collectively called the dorsal columns. And all the white matter that's found here on both sides. Okay, these are called your lateral columns. It's one on both sides. So that's your lateral column. Okay, and all the white matter that's left over here in the anterior portion of the spinal cord is just going to be collectively known as your anterior column. Okay, the next little bit talking about what these things are, we're going to fill in what's in all of the columns. What are the important parts that we have to know about in all of the columns? Okay, starting first at the bottom, we're going to put in all of our somatosensory columns that we've talked about so far. The first, and so this side is going to be duplicated on this side. So they're both the same. So we'll just go ahead and do that. There's going to be, let's put it in here. All this information is going to carry, all these blocks are nothing more than bundles of myelinated axons, all carrying the same information. Just one on the right side and one on the left side. Okay, here, this first group of myelinated axons that I've drawn in has a special name. It's called fasciculus, F-A-S-C-I-C-U-L-U-S, gracilis, G-R-A-C-I-L-I-S. Okay, if you remember way back when we talked about fasciculus, fasciculus is nothing more than another term for white matter. Myelinated axons, that's your white matter. Okay. And then just to the outside of that, we're going to have another column. And another bunch of myelinated axons that travel up the spinal cord together. They're part of the dorsal column. system. And this is another kind of fasciculus. This is going to be fasciculus cuneatus. Fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. Okay, fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus are part of the DCML, dorsal column. We're going to talk about the medial lemniscus later. That's going to be in the medulla. Okay, but fasciculus gracilis carries information that travels up the DCML tract from lower extremities. Fasciculus cuneatus carries information from upper extremities. And again, we'll get into a whole lot more detail about that. Yes?
What's the second word for fasciculus? What is it called? Not the gracilis. What's the other one?
Cuneatus. C-U-N-E-A-T-U-S. Cuneatus. C-U-N-E-A-T-U-S.
And both go through the DCML, and agreement does upper extremity, and the middle one does.
Lower extremity. Like I said, we'll talk more about that later. But you should know that the most medial one is gracilis, fasciculus gracilis, more lateral, fasciculus cuneatus, and they're both part of the DCML system, dorsal column. And they reside in the dorsal column of the spinal cord. Make sense? Hopefully. And thinking about the other white matter tracts that we're going to talk about in somatosensory, you're going to have a pair. So just below the dorsal great horn here, you're going to have another one here on this side, and a corresponding one here on that side. Okay, just the next ones in sequence, and these next ones in sequence, these are the, since they're more dorsal, this represents axons traveling through the dorsal spinocerebellar tract. Okay, that's ones we're going to learn when we talk about the cerebellar system, cerebellum. They carry non-conscious proprioception information, and mostly dorsal. And then moving on down, there's the next one. If this is the dorsal spinal cerebellar tract, right next to it is going to be the ventral spinal cerebellar tract. So ventral. So dorsal spinal cerebellars, more dorsal. Ventral spinal cerebellars, a little bit more. Ventral spinal cerebellar tract. Okay, and then we have another one. What's this color? There's another piece here that carries somatosensory information, and it kind of crosses over. It's part of the lateral column system and the anterior column system. Okay, so it kind of crosses over its territory just a little bit. And that's why sometimes you hear it called the anterolateral spinothalamic tract. So this is going to be your STT, or your spinothalamic tract. Okay, your spinothalamic tract carries true touch, pain, and temperature. Okay, this tract is just nothing more than a bunch of myelinated axons traveling up through the spinal cord. Okay, questions about that? So you'll be responsible for knowing the basic positions of these. This is information that you need to know. The dorsal columns, fasciculus gracilis, cuneatus, dorsal spinal cerebellar, ventral spinal cerebellar, as well as spinal thalamic tract, all here. And the somatosensory is all down here in the bottom portion. It's like spinal thalamic tract. Okay, got it? A lot of information. But I feel like if I put somatosensory down here, and then I can put motor up here on this top one. Everybody got that? So all the motor information is going to be on this one. Okay, the big one. So realize that, you know, ordinarily these would be up here too. So I'm just going to put the motor up here, somatosensory up down here. But right here underneath the dorsal gray horn, it's going to be your big motor as far as PT is concerned, and that's going to be your, since it's in the lateral system, this is your lateral corticospinal tract. Corticospinal tract. Okay, and then same thing on both sides. Underneath your lateral corticospinal tract, there's going to be, this is that big old, this is the bundle of axons traveling down from the red nucleus. Okay, this is going to be your rubrospinal tract. Okay, so lateral corticospinal is a biggie. Rubrospinal just underneath of it. And then as far as color, what did I? Yeah, we'll use the same kind of pinkish here. There's another corticospinal tract, and this corticospinal tract is actually part of the anterior system. Okay. So here's your lateral corticospinal tract. It's part of the lateral column system. Here, this is part of your corticospinal tract that's in the anterior column system, and this is your anterior corticospinal tract. Okay, so lateral corticospinal, anterior corticospinal, rubrospinal. Okay, and then I think I did so hopefully this will come through. So there's the orange down here. Okay, part of your motor system. This is the tract that's coming out of your vestibular nucleus. Okay, and that's going to be your vestibulospinal tract. So vestibulospinal tract, part of the anterior system. It's more toward the front. And then, I think I used pink. Yeah. And then just above your vestibulospinal tract, this is the last one that we need to add. This one is your reticulospinal tract. So your reticulospinal tract versus your vestibulospinal tract. Sometimes people can get those confused because they're both with extensor musculature, and they're both kind of in the anterior system. The way that I remember it is, if I'm looking at this picture, the vestibulospinal, three-dimensionally it's going to be more toward the anterior, but I think about it as V being at the bottom of the alphabet, and this would be more at the bottom. And our reticulospinal is above it. So think about alphabet position. Vestibulospinal is at the very bottom. And that's it. Lots of information. Realize that, so all this information, so that all the somatosensory information is going to be traveling upward, right? So it would be here also, and anything coming from the dorsal column is going to be going up. Okay, so traveling in an upward direction. And all of your dorsal spinal cerebellar also traveling upward. Okay, and all the others, somatosensory information is coming from the outside and traveling up. And then conversely, all of your motor information is going to be traveling down. So this would be coming down, and it would be here. Okay. So everybody see that? I'm just trying to represent that these are tracks. A lot of times I've explained tracks to patients before as nothing more than railroad tracks, if you want to think about it. So different spelling, right? But it's kind of the same concept. They're all in line. They're just traveling down this one long rail. That's another way to conceptualize it. And here what I've done is I put all the somatosensory and all the motor, but realize you put them all together, you end up with the big picture. Questions? Yes, Jared?
So the fasciculus cuneatus, does it like taper off towards the end of the spinal cord? Because you said it's upper extremities. Or is
Taper
it-
off. Oh, I understand. I think I understand your question. Let me see if I answer it right. So what actually happens is a gracilis is more medial, so that the lower extremity information comes in first and then is only medial. So anything below the level of T6, there's no fasciculus cuneatus. It's all fasciculus
Okay.
gracilis. But it's kind of stacked medially,
Yeah.
and then above the level of T6, you start populating cuneatus with axons. Okay, does that make sense?
What was that spinal level?
T6. We'll talk about that more as we go. This is just a kind of a broad everything today. Were there any other questions? Okay, a lot of information. I really feel like a lot of this is just words. These are new words. We'll go over these words over and over until you're much more familiar with them. But you definitely need to know the positions of these tracks with respect to the spinal cord, because patient presentation is going to depend on which of these tracks was damaged. So think about a person with a spinal cord injury. We're going to talk about that as we go. Okay, moving on. Compared to that drawing, this one's easy. We're gonna talk about roots, nerves, and rami. Okay, this is really straightforward. Okay, so this is my rendition of a muscle. So this is just going to be over here, and this is going to be specifically representing a back muscle. So back musculature, as well as, so you have the muscle and then you have the skin, so you have cutaneous sensation coming from the back. So the back of the body. So your back. Go ahead and label things. Sorry, question?
What does that say? Like the top?
Back, cutaneous
Okay.
sensation. Okay, back, coming from your back. Okay, so that's one part to label. And then this is also extremity and rest of trunk musculature. So for the bottom one, so extremity So both upper and lower extremities, and rest of trunk. Musculature. Okay, and as well as sensation and sensation. Okay. So this is just where we're going to draw in the sensory information and the motor information here in a minute, but this is where they're going to end up. They're either going to end up supplying innervation to the back musculature or back cutaneous sensation, or they're going to end up supplying the extremities, upper and lower extremities, and the rest of your trunk. Okay, so musculature and cutaneous sensation. Go through and label a few more things. So we talked about this before. Any guesses as to what this thing is? What's that? Yeah, that's your dorsal root ganglia right there. And again, that makes sense because this is dorsal, right? This part would be dorsal because the gray horn is touching the outside. So this is dorsal and this is ventral. Okay, and we talked before, here's your dorsal gray horn. Ventral gray horn. Okay, central canal. And we talked a little bit about the dorsal gray horn containing neuronal cell bodies, second order neurons for the sensory system. So this would be a second order neuronal cell body. Okay. And we also talked about the first order neuronal cell body for both the DCML and the STT as the neuronal cell body. Here's the neuronal cell body. There's a little stalk. Okay, the axon coming out here, synapses with that second order neuron. So this would be a first order somatosensory neuronal cell body. Okay. We also talked about, for the motor system, that the neuronal cell bodies are going to reside here in the ventral gray horn. And this neuronal cell body has a special name. It's called an alpha motor neuron. Okay, the alpha motor neurons are going to be the cell body for the lower motor neuron. And they reside in the ventral gray horn. Okay, so this is the axons from the alpha motor neuron leave the ventral gray horn and travel through this space right here. Okay. And easy enough, this is this space, and here we have the dorsal root. This is your ventral root. That's the first part of this. This is your roots. It's your ventral root. Okay, your ventral root contains only axons from motor neurons. Your dorsal root contains only sensory information. Okay. So these are your roots. You have a dorsal root and a ventral root. Ventral is motor, dorsal is somatosensation. The dendrite here comes out and then travels through this space. And then this axon also travels through this space. When you get to the level of this space, this is the part that's actually exiting the vertebra. And this place is called your spinal nerve. Okay, so your spinal nerve, in contrast to the root, carries both motor and somatosensory information. And somatosensory information coming from back musculature travels through this structure here. Okay, so cutaneous sensation coming from the back travels through this structure, and this structure is nothing more than a dorsal ramus. So we stick with the dorsal, but we've gone from root to nerve to ramus, R-A-M-U-S, is singular. Okay, so sensory information coming from back musculature travels through the dorsal ramus, goes through the spinal nerve. First order neuron cell body resides in the dorsal root ganglia and comes in through the dorsal gray horn. Sensory information comes from the extremities, and the rest of the trunk travel through this space. Okay, this space is called the ventral ramus. This alpha motor neuron axon coming through here travels through dorsal ramus, innervate back musculature, and it also can travel through, or if it's destined for the extremities and trunk, it's going to travel through the ventral ramus to get through the extremities and trunk. So the rami, as well as the nerves, carry both somatosensory and motor information, but the roots only carry, for dorsal root, somatosensory, for ventral root, motor. Questions? Yes, Derek.
Rams carries sensory information to the back.
From the back. So
From the back.
the sensory information from the back travels through the dorsal ramus, through the spinal nerve, and then through the dorsal root.
And then what about from the ventral ramus, where it comes from? Like the trunk?
The ventral ramus carries information from the rest of the extremities, all extremities, upper and lower extremities, and the rest of your trunk. Anything that is your back musculature. Anybody else? Okay. Pretty straightforward, I hope. Doing good. Now moving on to reflexes. Do you guys know reflexes? Does anybody know any basic reflexes? Okay, we'll talk about them. First we'll start with something called the myotatic reflex. Another name for the myotatic reflex that you might hear more often is just your basic stretch reflex. And that's because it works based on muscle stretch. Use this. No, because you can see it. Okay, so muscle. Muscle itself, so here's my cross-section through the spinal cord, right? Here's my dorsal root ganglia, my dorsal gray horn, ventral gray horn, and ventral root. right? We just went through that. So dorsal root, ventral root, gray matter, white matter. So thinking, and then looking on the left-hand side here, this is my rendition of quadriceps and hamstrings. So this is my muscle, so it's quadriceps and hamstrings. Here's the femur. Okay, right, and the hamstrings are going to come down here. So there's your tendon, and then leg and foot. So basic muscle is composed of two different kinds of fibers. One fiber is just the basic muscle fiber, and that's known as an extrafusal, EXTRAFUSAL fiber. Okay, an extrafusal fiber is just basic skeletal muscle. So they're skeletal muscle fibers. Okay, does anybody know what the other kind of fiber is? It's an intrafusal fiber. So extrafusal are skeletal muscle fibers, and then you also have intrafusal fibers. And these are kind of intercalated in with the extrafusal fibers, and I'll represent them here as by the orange. They're just another kind of fiber that's present in all muscles. Okay, and your intrafusal fibers are your muscle spindles. Your muscle spindles, their job in life, it's a special kind of receptor that detects muscle stretch. Okay, you guys are going to learn to do reflexes in CP3, and your basic reflexes is where you just take a hammer and nice quick hit. Typically, a really easy reflex to get is if you just took a hammer and hit right here on the patellar tendon, right? So it's going to have hit with a hammer to elicit a stretch reflex. Well, this is the neuroscience behind how a stretch reflex actually works. Okay, so it's the intrafusal fibers, or the muscle spindles, that detect muscle stretch. Okay, so you have hooked up to these intrafusal fibers, or the muscle spindles, you have kind of sensory neuron. This is called a type 1A. It's a type 1A fiber, just a kind of neuron. It's not a sensory neuron. Type 1A fiber. Okay, and that's hooked up, that's connected to the muscle spindle. And just like everybody else, you have your neuronal cell body here in your dorsal root ganglia. I'll label that. That's your dorsal root ganglia. All right, there's your dorsal root ganglia and the neuronal cell body. So the dendrites are going to come out here through the dorsal root, and these guys are associated with your muscle spindles. Okay. The axons from this first order neuron are going to come in here, okay, and then it bifurcates. So here you're going to synapse an alpha motor neuron. Here's neuronal cell body, lower motor neuron cell body. We can say alpha motor neuron, which is a lower motor neuron. Okay, that's the cell body. And let's say that this is specific for the quadriceps, or the quads. Okay, so if I take my hammer and I hit somebody's patella tendon, what happens to the quads? Yeah, they contract. I get quad contraction. So this is a stimulatory response. So I'm stimulating this type 1A fiber is going to come here, synapse with alpha motor neuron specific for the quads, and it's going to cause my quads to fire. So it's going to be a stimulatory response. Okay, and this is all happening at the level of the spinal cord. Okay, nothing more. You're at the level of the spinal cord. That information doesn't travel all the way up to the brain. Usually when you do a reflex on somebody, it's bang. You make that hit, and they're going to kick out right away. That's only because it's traveling in this reflex arc, is what it's called. Okay. In addition, if your quads are going to contract and you're going to kick, what muscle do you want to relax? Hamstrings. You got it. So, remember way back a couple weeks ago, last week, I'm not really sure, we talked about these things called interneurons. Okay. This guy's an interneuron, and it's going to be an inhibitory interneuron. So it's going to inhibit. Label that as inhibitory interneuron. Okay, so not only does that type 1A fiber synapse with quadriceps in a stimulatory manner, it also synapses with this inhibitory neuron, and the inhibitory neuron's synapses is going to inhibit the alpha motor neuron that is responsible for hamstrings. So this is your alpha motor neuron cell body for hamstrings. Okay, alpha motor neuron cell body. This axon is now inhibited due to this inhibitory interneuron. Like I said, they're just little connectors. They can be stimulatory or inhibitory. In this case, it's inhibitory. The axon comes out the ventral root and inhibits the hamstrings. And that's your basic stretch reflex in a nutshell. Okay, most important thing you need to know, stretch reflex works through the muscle spindles. Okay, muscle spindles are part of the intrafusal fibers of your muscle. Extrafusal fibers are just regular skeletal muscle. Associated with type 1A fibers, neuronal cell fibers, associated with the muscle spindles. Neuronal cell body resides in the dorsal root ganglia, just like all others, comes in, bifurcates. It's stimulatory due to the tendon tap for quadriceps. It's also inhibitory by hooking up or synapsing with an inhibitory interneuron that is connected to the hamstring. Alpha motor neuron comes through the ventral root and inhibits the hamstring. Hence you get the kick. Okay, that's your basic myotatic or stretch reflex. Simple reflex arc. Questions? Is that pretty clear? Have you guys seen these before? Have you seen reflexes? Not yet? No, you're looking at me like, okay, that's fine. I'll be happy to introduce reflexes to you. That's no problem. Like I said, this is how reflexes work. In CP3, in the spring semester, you're going to learn how to actually do reflexes. Do biceps and brachioradialis, triceps, patellar, and Achilles. Okay. All right, if there are no questions, let's go ahead and see if we can get one more in here. There's something called the next reflex is the inverse myotatic reflex. Okay, or inverse stretch reflex, any way you want to look at it. And I, when I first started doing this, I was thinking about how to, the stretch reflex itself, why do you think the stretch reflex is important? What does it help to do? Huh?
Roll your ankle. That's not bad.
Sorry, but think about if I really stretch, so think about stretching your muscle. That's another place where it's going to happen, right? If you overstretch your muscle, is it going to stretch? And it's got to be a fast stretch, right? A quick stretch. If you quick stretch your muscle, is that the best way to stretch it? The ballistic stretching? No, absolutely not. So what's that stretch reflex protecting? Your muscle from tearing. That's it. That's what the stretch reflex is for. Now this one, the myotatic, the inverse myotatic reflex is going to detect tension on a muscle. Okay, this is supposed to represent like a 50-pound cuff weight. Probably not accurate. Let's go ahead and say if you want to label that 450 pounds, maybe you'll get a better feel. 50 pounds might be easy to lift with one leg, right? But let's say you were trying really hard to lift 450 pounds just with a seated quad extension, right, or knee extension exercise. 450 pounds with one leg. Your muscle's going to complain and go, oh, wow, that's a lot of weight, right? That's just too much for me. Okay, there's something else that detects that. Does anybody know what detects the tension on the muscle?
The GTO.
Yeah, the GTO. So this is going to be your GTO, which is also, it's called your Golgi tendon organ. Okay, your GTO detects muscle tension. So in other words, if you're contracting so much that your GTO feels like it's way too much tension on the muscle, it's actually going to inhibit that muscle from firing. And that's what the job of the GTO is. Detects muscle tension. Okay, and the GTO, like I said, it's a tendon organ, so it resides in the tendon of the muscle. So here's the knee patellar tendon. Let's just think about quadriceps versus hamstrings. Okay, how does that work? So if we look at, so we can do it. Here's your dorsal root ganglia, and your dorsal root ganglia resides your neuronal cell body. Okay, a little bit of the stalk coming out here. The dendrites are going through the dorsal root. Okay, and these dendrites are going to be hooked up with the GTO, your Golgi tendon organ. Okay, these are, so the stretch reflex was type 1A fibers. These are type 1B fibers. Just a different fiber type. That's type 1B fibers are associated with your Golgi tendon organ. Okay, this guy, I'm going to do this. This guy comes in through your dorsal root, coming into your dorsal gray horn, and again, bifurcates. And it synapses with your interneurons. So here's another interneuron. And then here's this interneuron. Okay, except this interneuron is going to be inhibitory, and this one is going to be stimulatory. Let me label those. This is a stimulatory interneuron. And these are just connectors. And this one's going to be an inhibitory interneuron. Okay, so stimulatory and inhibitory interneurons. And again, we have neuronal cell bodies, or the alpha motor neurons. In this case, this is going to be the quads. And these are going to be the hamstrings. So this is your alpha motor neuron for the quads. And here's your alpha motor neuron for the hamstrings. And just like the stretch reflex, the alpha motor neuron for the quads, this time the type 1B fibers are associated with an inhibitory interneuron. And that makes sense because you want to shut those quads down so they don't tear. So you're going to be here. It's going to result in an inhibition of the quads. That type 1B fiber is now associated with a stimulatory interneuron that's hooked up with the hamstrings. Because if you inhibit the quads, you want the hamstrings to fire. And you've got stimulation of the hamstrings. This process of inhibiting the quads due to increased tension is called autogenic inhibition. So the process itself is called autogenic inhibition. And you can use weights to do this, or if something's too heavy. You could also apply pressure on a tendon. And just that pressure, that increased tension, is going to cause that muscle to shut down. Question? We'll talk about more in neurorehab next year. We use autogenic inhibition a lot of times with patients with spasticity. And then there's one, having said that, there's one more thing when we talk about the myotatic stretch reflex. The myotatic reflex, one thing I did not mention, this is the last thing that I'll do. Does anyone know what this process is called? The last one's autogenic inhibition. So, okay, well, so you're inhibiting the hamstrings here. This is reciprocal. Reciprocal inhibition. So reciprocal inhibition means that you're shutting down the hamstrings on the opposite side due to the stretch reflex. Autogenic inhibition means you're shutting down the muscle that's associated with that tendon that has too much tension on it. Two different things. Questions? Makes sense? So just your basic reflex. Sam, was that almost a question? Almost, not quite?
Is
So the alpha motor neuron is a lower motor neuron. It's part of the motor system. For the motor system, it's a two-neuron system. You have your upper motor neuron, and then you have your lower motor neuron. Your alpha motor neuron is your lower motor neuron. Okay. That's the one that resides in the ventral vagal horn and innervates skeletal muscle directly. Is that another question? Any other questions? No? We good? Okay, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more to do the flexion withdrawal and class extension. Easily we'll do that at the beginning of the next class. Okay?